classes. I got a crazy teacher who wears dark glasses. Things are going great, and they're only getting better.
Welcome to part 2 of this video series on assertiveness, argumentativeness, and verbal aggressiveness. Let's pick up where we left off about appropriateness of aggressive communication.
Good researchers are always seeking to predict and explain. So in an effort to do just that, Infante and Rancer developed a model of aggressive communication. And the model breaks aggressive communication into the two categories, and they're essentially based on the locus of attack. There's constructive, which is the better, more healthy form, but there's also destructive aggressive communication. And how you determine what's constructive and what's destructive works like this. If a person feels that the act is constructive or destructive, if somebody says, hey man, no, it was destructive, it really brought me down, it really sort of tore me up, then it was destructive communication. When both persons agree on whether the act was constructive or destructive, when an observer deems the act to be either constructive or destructive, so if the third party is watching, and whether the act is consistent with societal norms for classifying the act as constructive or destructive, meaning we can't remove the context. So in some cultures, things that would be constructive are destructive in other cultures, and we have to take that context into consideration. Definitely speaking, the constructive forms of aggressive communication include assertiveness and argumentativeness. The destructive forms of communication include hostility and verbal aggressiveness. We're going to dig a little deeper first on the constructive side. I love this picture because look at that dog. Just standing there, having sort of run circles around them, maybe nipping at their heels, but probably not. Probably just running circles and sort of barking, maybe not even all that forcefully. Got those sheep to go into one place. And now the dog, just by standing still, is accomplishing getting them to stay in one place, at least for a few minutes. They are sheep, right? So assertiveness is about being interpersonally dominant and forceful. And assertiveness means that we achieve our personal goals while we create positive feelings in others. It's conceptualized as the communication trait, or a communication trait that's constructive, because it involves using verbal and nonverbal symbols to exert control or get justified rewards, and to avoid violating other people's rights. So assertiveness means that we've used communication to accomplish our goals, but not stepped on the toes of others. They use symbols aggressively, but in a socially acceptable way. That's assertiveness. Assertive individuals stand up for their rights. They express their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in a way that's direct, honest, and appropriate. So that's the first trait that's part of the constructive forms of aggressiveness. Okay, the second trait that's part of the constructive side of the model of aggressive communication is argumentativeness. And argumentativeness is a subset of assertiveness. So all argument is considered assertive, but not all assertiveness involves argument. Here is the definition that we use. A generally stable trait which predisposes the individual in communication situations to advocate positions on controversial issues and to attack verbally the positions which other people have on these issues. So the first definition was published in 1982, but of course there have been years of research since then. And Infante, Rancer, and other researchers have collectively contributed to a new categorization of argumentativeness. Essentially, it comes up to 5 categories, and I'm going to briefly tell you about it, although I don't think it's important for you to know it in detail, but rather to understand it from a sort of contextual point of view. You can see at the top of the table we have low args. They have pretty high motivation to avoid, not much motivation to approach an argument. There's not really anything specific in the literature about other emotion or intensity of emotion that they experience when they, with regard to argument, except anxiety. They probably feel some anxiety. Some people may just more matter-of-factly avoid it. People who are high args don't usually have a motivation to avoid argument. They absolutely are thrilled and just really jazzed up by arguing, and they get excited, little to no anxiety. The other three categories are more recent in the research. Conflicted feelings or moderate, they have a motivation to avoid, but they also have a motivation to approach. They have strong competitiveness, and the researchers suspect that that is what motivates them when something becomes something they really care about or they want to compete in. But their anxiety is more about fear of failing and not winning the argument. People who are apathetic generally have no interest, very little anxiety, just don't care about the arguments. And then the neutrals, who tend to be motivated situationally. So just understand that those categories exist. Understand that it comes on a range of low to high, and then some situational ideas that probably could use some more research given what we were just talking about with regard to traits. So on the slide you can see I've bulleted the signs that communication behaviors were argumentative. What I'm going to do is actually convert those into questions and ask you to consider the last argument you were in and see if you were argumentative, assertive, or maybe did you cross the line from argumentativeness into something more aggressive. So here they are. Did you show an understanding of the other person's position, maybe by summarizing it or even allowing the other person to correct your understanding after the summary? Did you leave out ridicule of the other and focus on position? Were more arguments and evidence provided as the conversation progressed? Was any attacking directed toward the position, not the person? And did you defend your own position before giving in to the other person? If you can answer yes to those questions without question, then you probably remained on the constructive side of aggressive communication. All right, so just taking a moment here to recap. Assertiveness and argumentativeness are in the constructive category of the aggressive communication model. Let's pause for just a moment and get a short video clip that goes a long way toward demonstrating assertiveness and argumentativeness.
Is that everyone?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Did everyone read Eileen McNamara's column this weekend?
That's the Gagan case?
Yeah. What's the follow on that?
It's a column. What kind of follow are you thinking?
Well, apparently this priest molested kids in 6 different parishes over the last 30 years, and the attorney for the victims, Mr.
Garabedian.
Thanks, Eileen. Mr. Garabedian says Cardinal Law found out about it 15 years ago and did nothing.
Yeah, I think that attorney's a bit of a crank, and the church dismissed the claim.
He said, she said.
Whether Mr. Garabedian is a crank or not, he says he has documents that prove the Cardinal knew.
As I understand it, those documents are under seal.
Okay, but the fact remains a Boston priest abused 80 kids. We have a lawyer who says he can prove Law knew about it, and we've written all of 2 stories in the last 6 months. This strikes me as an essential story to a local paper. I think at the very least, we have to go through those documents.
How would you like to do that?
Well, I don't know what the laws are here, but in Florida, we would go to court.
You want to sue the church?
Technically, we wouldn't sue the church. We'd file a motion to lift the seal on those documents.
The church will read that as us suing them. So will everybody else.
Good to know.
The editor proposes a topic that the rest of the editors say, you know what, we already covered this once before. And the conversation ensues there's some debate, and it just a hair, the conversation begins to step over the line from argumentativeness, which is constructive, to destructive, which we'll talk about in just a moment, when they say, oh, you know what, that guy's a crank. But quickly the conversation returns to the merits of the case for why the story should be included and something they spend time and resources on. So a great example of really fairly healthy conversation focused on that demonstrates argumentativeness.
Okay, that closes up part 2 of the assertiveness, argumentativeness, and verbal aggressiveness video series. Please close up and look for part 3.
Better. I'm doing all right, getting good grades.